It began with a traffic stop that ended in gunfire. It escalated with protests that filled the frozen streets. It exploded into a constitutional crisis that has pitted a state government against the federal government in ways not seen since the civil rights era. 3 shootings, 3 weeks. 3 American lives forever changed by bullets fired by federal agents on American streets. Minneapolis, Minnesota has become the epicenter of the most intense confrontation between federal law enforcement and local resistance in modern American history. What started as an immigration enforcement operation has transformed into something far larger. A battle over sanctuary cities, a debate over federal power. A test of how far the government will go to enforce the law and how far citizens will go to resist. This is the complete timeline of what happened. This is what they're not telling you. This is the truth about Minneapolis. Welcome back. What you are witnessing is a city under siege, not by foreign enemies, not by terrorists, but by its own federal government, conducting operations that supporters call necessary law enforcement and critics call an occupation. To understand how Minneapolis reached this breaking point, you need to understand what came before. And it all goes back to fraud. For more than a decade, Minnesota has been home to one of the largest immigrant welfare fraud networks ever documented. The scheme centered on fraudulent daycare facilities, food programs, and various other benefits designed to help low-income families. But instead of helping families, the programs were being systematically looted. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. $250 million stolen from the Feeding Our Future program alone. More than $2 billion from fraudulent daycare operations. Billions more from housing assistance, medical benefits, and cash aid. When federal investigators finally tallied the full scope, the estimate exceeded $18 billion stolen over more than a decade. The perpetrators were predominantly from Minnesota's Somali immigrant community. The networks were sophisticated, the money flowed overseas, and Minnesota officials, from the governor's office down to local social services agencies, either failed to detect the fraud or actively chose to ignore it. When the Trump administration took office in January 2025, they inherited a Justice Department that had been slowly building cases against the fraud networks, but progress had been limited. Local officials weren't cooperating. State agencies were stonewalling. The sanctuary city policies that Minneapolis and Minnesota had adopted made federal immigration enforcement nearly impossible. The administration decided on a different approach. If Minnesota wouldn't help, the federal government would do it alone. Operation Metro Surge was born. If you believe that massive fraud like this should be investigated, regardless of the political sensitivities involved, hit that like button right now. The deployment began in December 2025. Military transport aircraft delivered waves of federal agents to Minneapolis. Border Patrol tactical teams, ICE enforcement and removal operations units, FBI support personnel, Homeland Security investigation specialists, IRS criminal investigation agents. Within days, more than 3,000 federal personnel were operating in the Minneapolis metropolitan area. They set up command posts, they established surveillance operations. They began executing arrest warrants and search warrants at a pace the city had never seen. The initial focus was the fraud networks. Agents raided suspected fraudulent daycares. They arrested operators, bookkeepers, and recruiters. They seized bank records, computers, and cash. They traced money flows to overseas accounts. But Operation Metro Surge was also an immigration enforcement operation. Many of the fraud suspects were in the country illegally or had violated the terms of their immigration status. ICE agents began arresting individuals with outstanding deportation orders. They conducted workplace raids. They set up checkpoints near known gathering places for the immigrant community. The response from Minnesota officials was immediate hostility. Governor Tim Walz accused the federal government of conducting a campaign of terror against immigrant communities. He ordered state agencies not to cooperate with federal agents. He directed the Minnesota National Guard to stand ready, though for what purpose he did not specify. Mayor Jacob Frey was even more aggressive. He ordered Minneapolis police to refuse any assistance to federal operations. He declared that city employees who cooperated with ICE could face discipline. He appeared at rallies, denouncing the federal presence. The battle lines were drawn. Federal agents versus local resistance. the Trump administration versus Democratic state leadership, the rule of law versus sanctuary city ideology. Then the shooting started. Should local officials who order police not to cooperate with federal law enforcement face federal charges? Comment yes or no below. January 7th, 2026, the first shooting. Peace agents were conducting an operation in South Minneapolis when they encountered a vehicle that matched the description of one used by a target. The driver was 37-year-old Renee Good, a Minneapolis resident and mother of 3. According to federal officials, agents identified themselves and ordered Good to exit the vehicle. She did not comply. When she put the car in motion, moving toward an agent, that agent fired 3 shots. Good was struck and killed. According to witnesses and video from the scene, the sequence of events was different. They say Good was confused by the sudden appearance of armed men who did not clearly identify themselves as law enforcement. They say she was trying to get away from what she perceived as a threat. They say she was executed for the crime of being scared. What is not disputed? Renee Good was an American citizen. She was not the target of the immigration operation. She had no criminal record. She left behind 3 children. The shooting ignited immediate protests. Hundreds gathered at the scene within hours. They demanded answers. They demanded accountability. They demanded that ICE leave Minneapolis. Federal officials defended the shooting as justified. They said the agent acted in self-defense when Good's vehicle moved toward him. They said the agent had no way of knowing whether Good was armed or what her intentions were. Minnesota officials rejected that explanation. Governor Walz called it murder. Mayor Frey called for the immediate withdrawal of all federal agents. The Hennepin County medical examiner ruled Good's death a homicide. The protests grew. Night after night, demonstrators filled the streets of Minneapolis. They chanted ICE out. They blocked intersections. They surrounded federal vehicles. They made it clear that the federal presence was not welcome. The federal government did not back down. If anything, they doubled down. If you think federal agents should be required to wear body cameras during all enforcement operations, type SWAT alert in the comments. January 14th, 2026. The second shooting. ICE agents conducting an operation in North Minneapolis encountered 28-year-old Julio Cesar Sosa-Celia, a Venezuelan national. According to federal officials, Sosa-Celia resisted arrest and assaulted agents during the confrontation. An agent fired, striking Sosa-Celia in the leg. He survived, but was taken into federal custody. Unlike Renee Good, Sosa-Celia was not an American citizen. He was in the country without legal status. Federal officials pointed to his case as an example of why aggressive immigration enforcement was necessary. But critics noted that Sosa-Celia had no violent criminal history. They questioned whether shooting an unarmed man in the leg was an appropriate response to resistance. They argued that federal agents were too quick to use lethal force. The same day, agents conducted another operation that drew national attention. Garrison Gibson, a Liberian national who had lived in Minneapolis for years, was arrested at his home after federal agents used a battering ram to break down his door. His family, including a 9-year-old child, watched as armed agents flooded into their home. Gibson's attorney argued that the arrest was illegal because agents did not have a judicial warrant, only an administrative warrant that does not authorize forcible entry into a home. He filed a habeas petition, demanding Gibson's immediate release. The case highlighted the legal gray areas that federal agents were operating in. Administrative warrants, issued by immigration officials rather than judges, had traditionally been understood not to authorize breaking down doors. But under the Trump administration's interpretation of federal authority, agents were conducting forced entries anyway. Minnesota officials accused the federal government of violating the Constitution. Federal officials accused Minnesota officials of obstructing lawful enforcement operations. The situation was deteriorating by the day. January 21st, 2026. The child. Federal agents detained 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos and his father, Adrian Conejo Arias, outside their home in suburban Minneapolis. Photographs of the terrified preschooler being held by armed agents went viral. The child's mother was already in federal custody. Now the father was being detained as well. The 5-year-old was initially held by federal agents before being released to relatives. School officials said the child had been used as bait by agents to draw out family members hiding inside the home. Federal officials denied this characterization, but did not explain why a 5-year-old needed to be detained at all. The images of Liam Conejo Ramos shocked the nation. Even some supporters of aggressive immigration enforcement questioned whether this was the right approach. Former Vice President Kamala Harris called it outrageous and said the child was just a baby. The Trump administration was unmoved. They pointed out that the father had an outstanding deportation order. They said enforcing immigration law sometimes meant difficult situations. They promised to continue the operation. January 23, 2026. The general strike. Minnesota fought back in the only way it could, economically. Organizers called for a statewide Day of Truth and Freedom. They asked businesses to close. They asked workers to stay home. They asked consumers to stop spending. They wanted to show the federal government that Minnesota would not submit quietly. The response exceeded all expectations. More than 700 businesses across Minnesota closed their doors. Restaurants, coffee shops, bookstores, museums, major employers encouraged workers to participate. Schools closed early. Roads emptied. And in downtown Minneapolis, despite temperatures that dropped to minus 29 degrees Celsius, an estimated 50,000 people marched through the streets. They chanted "ICE out." They waved American flags. They carried signs demanding justice for Renee Good. At the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, 100 clergy members were arrested for blocking access to deportation flights. They sang hymns as they were loaded onto buses. It was the largest protest in Minnesota history. It was a direct challenge to the federal government. It was a message that the resistance would not end. The federal government had its own message. Vice President J.D. Vance flew to Minneapolis that same week. He toured federal facilities, he praised ICE agents, he accused Governor Walz and Mayor Frey of encouraging violence against federal officers. These politicians are putting federal lives at risk with their dangerous rhetoric, Vance declared. They will be held accountable. The Department of Justice had already opened an investigation into Walz and Frey for potentially conspiring to obstruct federal officers. Subpoenas were expected. For the first time in modern history, a sitting governor and major city mayor were under federal criminal investigation for resisting immigration enforcement. If you want to see the full truth about what's happening in Minneapolis, subscribe to this channel right now. January 24th, 2026. The third shooting. Yesterday. The day after the largest protest in state history, federal agents killed another American citizen on the streets of Minneapolis. Alex Jeffrey Pretti, 37, was an ICU nurse at the Minneapolis VA hospital. He was a licensed gun owner. He was a Minneapolis resident who had come to the Eat Street neighborhood to witness the federal operations happening in his city. According to federal officials, Pretti approached agents with a 9mm handgun while they were conducting an enforcement operation. When agents attempted to disarm him, he violently resisted. An agent fired defensive shots. According to video from the scene, the story was very different. The footage shows Pretti holding a cell phone, not a gun, as he approached federal agents. It shows an agent pepper spraying Pretti and nearby protesters. It shows Pretti trying to help a woman who had been knocked down. It shows multiple agents tackling Pretti to the ground. It shows agents punching him repeatedly while he was restrained. It shows an agent drawing a weapon. It shows Pretti being shot multiple times while pinned to the pavement. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara confirmed that Pretti was a lawful gun owner with a valid permit to carry. Minnesota law allows open carry with a permit. If Pretti had a weapon, he had a legal right to possess it. Governor Walz reviewed the video and called the federal account nonsense. He said what he saw with his eyes was an execution. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem had a different interpretation. She called Pretti a domestic terrorist who had arrived to inflict maximum damage on individuals. She provided no evidence to support this characterization. The shooting drew hundreds of protesters to the scene. They confronted armed federal agents who deployed tear gas and flashbang grenades. The agents eventually withdrew, mocking protesters as they left. "Boo-hoo," one agent said. A federal judge has issued a temporary restraining order preventing the destruction of evidence from the shooting. State and local officials are conducting their own investigation. The DOJ has announced it will review the incident. 3 shootings, 3 weeks. 2 American citizens dead, 1 wounded. 0 federal agents facing charges. The final count from Minneapolis, as of this broadcast, 3 shootings involving federal agents in less than 3 weeks. 2 American citizens killed, including Renee Good and Alex Pretti. 1 foreign national wounded. More than 3,000 federal agents deployed. More than 3,000 individuals arrested. More than $89 million in assets seized. 50,000 protesters in the streets. 700 businesses closed in solidarity. 100 clergy arrested at the airport. 1 governor under federal investigation. 1 mayor under federal investigation. And a city that has become the symbol of America's deepest divisions. Minneapolis is not at peace. The federal agents are still there. The protests continue every night. The arrests continue every day. The investigations continue on all sides. Some see Operation Metro Surge as necessary law enforcement, finally addressing years of fraud and illegal immigration that local officials refuse to touch. They see the protests as obstruction. They see the resistance as lawlessness. Others see it as federal overreach, a militarized occupation of an American city that has resulted in the deaths of American citizens. They see the fraud investigation as a pretext. They see the immigration enforcement as persecution. The truth is somewhere in the chaos of Minneapolis streets, in the frozen protests and the battering rams, in the body camera footage that federal agents won't release, in the cells where thousands wait for their fate to be decided. What happens in Minneapolis will shape the future of sanctuary cities. It will define the limits of federal immigration enforcement. It will determine whether elected officials can be prosecuted for resisting federal operations. It will establish precedents that will echo for decades. When cities become battlegrounds, SWAT Alert reports the truth. The snow keeps falling on Minneapolis, the federal agents keep operating, the protesters keep marching, and the questions keep multiplying. How did it come to this? Where does it end? And how many more will fall before it's over? Stay vigilant.